Alas, the city once full of people now sits all alone. The prominent lady among the nations has become a widow. The princess who once ruled the provinces has become a forced laborer. Thus begins, in Hebrew the word is akah, alas, that we call the Book of Lamentations. In English Bibles, you'll find the Book of Lamentations between Jeremiah and Ezekiel. And that's because it kind of feels perhaps chronologically appropriate, but really it's because a lot of people have associated Lamentations with Jeremiah, as if Jeremiah is the author. It's entirely possible Jeremiah was the author. There's nothing that would preclude that, because Lamentations was written in the wake of the destruction of Jerusalem in 586. If the author did not live through that experience, he's definitely lived through a similar experience at some point. But we do believe he's someone who experienced that destruction firsthand and was able to write about it in Lamentations. And because a lot of people thought it was Jeremiah, it was put next to Jeremiah in our Bibles. And so that's where there's a natural association there. But in the Hebrew Bible, it is part of the writings, the Ketuvim, and it's part actually of the Megillot, the 5 scrolls, along with books like Esther and Song of Solomon, Ruth, Ecclesiastes. And they are read at certain times. And of course, Lamentations is read on Tisha B'Av, on the remembrance of the day of the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC, which is the contextual one. And also because of this similar destruction in the year 70, which was prophesied by Jesus, among others, in the first century. You might expect it to be about prophecy if it's from Jeremiah, but this is not a book of prophecy. If anything, it's more like the Psalms than anything else because it is poetry. And the Book of Lamentations has a very disciplined form of poetry, considering everything that's in it and all the terrible things that it's describing. The chapters, what we call chapters, are really different laments. The first and second laments, along with the fourth and fifth lament, are straight acrostics. An acrostic is when you have a kind of poem where each line begins with successive letters in the alphabet. So in Hebrew, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, continuing, each verse begins with a word with that letter. The third lament is triple the length. So that's why the 1, 2, 4, and 5 are all 22 verses for the 22 letters of the Hebrew Bible. Chapter 3, or the third lament, is 66. And that's because we have triplet acrostics. So the first 3 verses all begin with Aleph. The next 3 verses all begin with Bet. Then the next 3, Gimel, Dalet, so on and so forth. And so we have, as we're going to hear and see, vivid, visceral expressions of grief, detailing everything that the people of God suffered in this moment. And yet it is being channeled and directed in this very disciplined form of poetry. In a way that could be sung, it could be prayed to God, or just cried out in agony. Because that's what Lamentations is here for. Lamentations is giving voice to the people of God who have gone through this devastating experience. But of course, not just them. Their children and their children's children, because it is something that is read, as I said, to this very day. And throughout, we're going to see how the events are described as if they are presently happening, as if it's a current reality, a current experience, even though, by all accounts, it's already all said and done by the time the author has written Lamentations. This is not a fun book, right? This is not a happy book. You probably haven't spent a lot of time in Lamentations. Probably haven't heard a lot of sermons on Lamentations. Most people try to avoid Lamentations like the plague because they want to avoid the situations which would beget Lamentations like the plague. And that is an understandable impulse, but it's here for a reason, and therefore we do well to explore it so that we may gain insight as to why it's here and how it may benefit us in our faith. We're going to consider the fourth lament in depth. First and 2 and the fourth lament are all somewhat similar and connected. So we're going to focus on the fourth lament, and we'll talk a little bit at other times about what's going on in some of the other ones. The fourth lament begins. Alas, gold has lost its luster. Pure gold loses value. Jewels are scattered on every street corner. The precious sons of Zion were worth their weight in gold. Alas, but now they are treated like broken clay pots made by a potter. Even the jackals nurse their young at their breast, but my people are cruel like ostriches in the wilderness. The infant's tongue sticks to the roof of its mouth due to thirst. Little children beg for bread, but no one gives them a morsel. Those who once feasted on delicacies are now starving to death in the streets. Those who grew up wearing expensive clothes are now dying amid garbage. The punishment of my people exceeds that of Sodom, which was overthrown in a moment, with no one to help her. Our consecrated ones were brighter than snow, whiter than milk, their bodies more ruddy than corals, their hair like lapis lazuli. But now their appearance is darker than soot. They are not recognized in the streets. Their skin has shriveled on their bones. It is dried up like tree bark. Those who die by the sword are better off than those who die of hunger, those who waste away, struck down from a lack of food. The hands of tender-hearted women cooked their own children, who became their food when my people were destroyed. Probably should have a trigger warning. This is some really ugly stuff. What we just heard here is a reporting of what was going on in the middle of that siege and as the siege ended. It can seem almost clinical at times when we read the stories in 2 Kings 25 and the prophets. We even hear the prophets, Ezekiel will say, a third will be led to the sword, a third will be slaughtered, and a third will be led away. And that there will be those who will die by the sword, die by famine or pestilence, and those who will be exiled. And we hear those we see those things. We even hear in Jeremiah having anticipatory agony about what's going to happen and the expectations of what's going to happen to his people. And we see that, right? But we don't know what it's like to have experienced something like that. They did. And a lot of times when it's all said and done, all that violence, I think, is done, the dead people don't tell any stories. Those who survive try to just can find a way to persevere somehow. But these are the things that they saw. These are horrible things. We would not want to wish this on perhaps our worst enemy. The kind of things we described here. But this is what would happen in the situation. The Babylonians have gone through the town. They've plundered things. They've taken so much stuff that they might have just left gold and other precious jewels on the ground because they're just already so full of them. Parents cannot provide for their children because they don't have anything either, and they're starving to death in the streets. In fact, at least Sodom got hit at once and it was over, and these have been suffering for some time. That the people who were well off, right? There are people who enjoy delicacies, and now they're dying of hunger on the streets. But not just them, right? Even the consecrated ones, those who are dedicated to various purposes, are now shriveled, broken people. In fact, it is in these situations considered better to die by the sword because it's quick, it's done, as opposed to the drawn-out death by starvation that many are experiencing. And this situation, which again we can't even begin just to imagine, but in siege situations, it may have just been something that was just kind of used as a kind of hyperbolic example, but it was mentioned back in 2 Kings when there was a siege of Samaria, even before the Syrians came. It's mentioned here in terms of the destruction of 586. It'll be mentioned by Josephus when it comes to the destruction in 70 of women taking and killing their children and cannibalizing them to survive, which again is just shocking to hear. Just how could they even desperate people in unimaginably desperate situations. This is not to justify or rationalize. It's to show this is what's going on. And this is what is encased here in these laments. He continues, Yahweh fully vented his wrath. He poured out his fierce anger. He started a fire in Zion and consumed her foundations. Neither the kings of the earth nor the people of the lands ever thought that enemy or foe could ever enter the gates of Jerusalem. But it happened due to the sins of her prophets and the iniquities of her priests who poured out in their midst the blood of the righteous. They wander blindly through the streets, defiled by the blood they shed, while no one dares to touch their garments. As we can see here, there's this continual, and he continues in the same vein for a while, where the real difference in this lament is that it's made very clear what happened. God punished them according to their sins. That this was God's discipline, God's punishment. And it's confessed. It's part of the story. It's to kind of explain what went on. there is a confidence in the end of this psalm. O people of Zion, your punishment will come to an end, but he will not prolong your exile. Then there's judgment, of course, against Edom for what the Edomites are doing. And so there's that hope of restoration. That hope is being extended out. Now, there are other moments in the first couple laments that we don't see in the fourth lament, where Jerusalem is given voice as if Jerusalem is speaking, weeping because her children are desolated, the enemy has prevailed. And not only that, we have the lamenter himself, whoever he is, Jeremiah, whoever his author is. And he says in chapter 2 and verse 11, my eyes are worn out from weeping, my stomach is in knots, my heart is poured out on the ground due to the destruction of my helpless people, children and infants faint in the town squares. Where that's the only response, right? You see this, there's this, the people are mourning, they're lamenting, their enemies have bested them, their enemies gloat over them, people walk by and it's like a byword, so they have the shame, everything has been destroyed. Again, you don't even want to imagine this kind of thing happening, where everything that you know, everything you thought was true has just been dashed before your eyes and destroyed before your eyes. And your enemies have won the victory over you, and you are left in the dust. And you're left to wonder if the dead are better off than the living, because they're no longer going through this particular nightmare. If we've noticed in these laments so far that the lamenter is giving voice to the people of God collectively, that it is a national disaster, right? Jerusalem is destroyed, the temple is destroyed, the Babylonians are exiling all the people. This is a national disaster. From the poorest to the wealthiest, everybody is participating in this, everybody's sharing in this. The third lament is different in as much as it is a more personal one, where the lamenter is the man who has experienced affliction from the rod of Yahweh's wrath, that God drove him into captivity. And from verse 1 here all the way through verse 21, we have all of these moments of despair, very much like what we'd expect in some lament psalms. All the various ways that God has caused this man distress and has torn him apart and ground him down the ground. But in verse 22, he turns, Yahweh's loyal kindness, his chesed, never ceases. His compassions never end. They are fresh every morning. Your faithfulness is abundant. My portion is Yahweh, I've said to myself, so I'll put my hope in him. Yahweh is good to those who trusted him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait patiently for deliverance from Yahweh. It is good for a man to bear the yoke while he is young. Let a person alone sit in silence when Yahweh is disciplining him. Let him bury his face in the dust. Perhaps there is hope. Let him offer his cheek to the one who hits him. Let him have his fill of insults. For Yahweh will not reject us forever. Though he causes grief, he has compassion on us according to the abundance of his loyal kindness, his chesed. He is not predisposed to afflict or to grieve people. And then there is the confidence in verse 34 to 36. To crush underfoot all the earth's prisoners, to deprive a person of his rights in the presence of the Most High. To defraud a person in a lawsuit, the Lord does not approve of these things. It's so interesting, right? That he's talking about the great pain he's in, and he's personalizing what he's done. It's also true nationally. But then he says his hope is in God, that he's not going to just leave this in despair. The laments don't just leave you entirely abandoned without hope. It's not nihilism. And in fact, if you notice there, it's not the ending. He continues in this very same idea. And in fact, looks forward to God judging the enemies of the people of God like he judged his people, which is the very reason that they are suffering these things, is God's judgment, that God had a holy standard that they violated. And that's their confidence that God is seeing the things that they're experiencing, their oppression, and God is not going to countenance that continuing on. And so they're putting their hope in him. This message here, and we got to remember that the miracle is the fact that there were some Judahites who would continue to believe in Yahweh, God of Israel, to zealously dedicate themselves to him and his customs, and to persevere. That was not guaranteed. We don't see that as much in Israel, in the kingdom to the north. We don't see that with the Philistines. We don't see that with a lot of nations exiled in similar ways. But what allowed them to sustain them in that are things like these laments, and the reminder that they don't just pour out grief without any confidence. There's hope in God. And that gets us to the last lament. Because the last lament is very much directed at God. Oh Yahweh, reflect on what has happened to us. Consider and look at our disgrace. And he'll go through that disgrace in verses 2 through 16. all the things they're suffering, how many people have died, how they are under the hand of others. They have to buy all their basic supplies. Our forefathers sinned and are dead, but we suffer their punishment in verse 7. They suffer every kind of depredation and mistreatment. The crown is fallen from our head in verse 16. They get just, woe to us, for we have sinned. Because of this our hearts are sick. Because of these things we can hardly see through our tears. For wild lambs are prowling through Mount Zion, which lies desolate. So there's a confession of sin, right? But you, O Yahweh, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Why do you keep on forgetting us? Why do you forsake us so long? Bring us back to yourself, O Yahweh, so that we may return to you. Renew our life as in days before, unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. So here we have a muted hope, right? It's a muted hope. This is the way the book ends. This is the last lament. And it leaves you on that note. It's a note of, look at how we have been degraded. We have sinned. But you, God, reign forever. Your throne, there's not a denial of God. And throughout this passage, throughout all laments, you're not going to find doubt of the existence of God. You're not even going to find doubt of God's goodness. God exists. God reigns forever. Those are guarantees. It's because of that faith that the lamenter is grappling with these things. And he has to maintain that. He wants God to do this. He has hope and confidence God is going to renew them and to restore them like before. But there is that doubt, unless you've utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure. If that were truly true, we wouldn't be reading about this, right? We wouldn't be talking about this. That there would be the hope restoration that is going to be ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. It's not going to be fulfilled in perhaps what they were looking for. It would not look like what they were expecting to look like, but it makes it no less true. Just because it looks like what God has done in Jesus, that God has proven faithful to his promises and has provided a way through. So this is not a fun book, is it? What can we take from it? We may find it hard to use lamentations to give voice to ourselves because, well, we may not be lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem. And may it never be that any of us experience any kind of disaster like what Jerusalem experienced, so that the images of Lamentations become vivid and real for us. It is terrible how so many people in this world today cannot say that because they have lived through that in the kind of wars that have been going on throughout the world throughout the past few generations. But it reminds us that there is a need for lament, that not everything's always going to be wonderful, that we're going to go through difficult things. And in fact, they're discovering that what makes the difference between people who go through trauma and persevere versus those who are consumed by their trauma a lot of times isn't necessarily a support system, although support system certainly helps. It's not necessarily mental health care, although that may certainly help. It's whether or not that they journaled through it or they did some experience where they're able to complete the trauma. Because our natural inclination is take trauma and shove it, or take trauma and to kind of push it away. And what that means is that our body hasn't fully processed it, and so we're constantly in vigilance mode, and that's going to lead to more stress, more cortisol, more inflammation, reduced immune system support, all these things. But if we talk through it, if we pray through it, if we write through it, we can complete it in our minds. We can complete it so that our body can return to its kind of stasis. And we see here very visceral, vivid language, voice given to speak through these laments. That there is a space for that. That you've got to speak it. You've got to confess that it happened. You've got to recognize that it is so you can complete it so that you can then move on. You persevere. It may not look, and I hope it doesn't look like what it looked like in 586. But it gives you that confidence, encouragement to say that, yeah, there are times you have to lament before God. Lament what happened. And bitter tears may come from it. To complete that so that you can persevere in faith like the lamenter did, to endure and maintain that confidence in the God who is just but also shows his covenant loyalty and of course has displayed that covenant loyalty in how he judged his people because of their disobedience, but how he has restored them and been faithful in what he has promised in Christ. And therefore let us take great encouragement in the Book of Lamentations and to serve God faithfully. We're so glad you joined us. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts about Lamentations, let us know. And continue our conversation in the comments. I'm Ethan, the Venice Church of Christ. If we can be of any service to you, please let us know. Please reach out to us at VeniceChurchOfChrist.org or on social media at Venice Church of Christ. We again thank you. May the Lord bless and keep you, make his face to shine upon you until we're able to meet again.